Yo, what's up everyone? Welcome, my name is Rachel, and today I'm going to be taking you through how I made my Rebecca costume from Cyberpunk Edgerunners. So with that, let's just get into it. First piece is gonna be the jacket. The loud chair is back. The first thing I did was break the jacket down into even smaller pieces. Underneath all that fancy detailing is just a oversized jacket with a collar. It did take me a few trips to the thrift store and some online sleuthing, but I did eventually find a pretty good jacket, if I do say so myself. I got this North Face Apex jacket from the thrift store for $15. Although this jacket wasn't perfect, I knew that with a few tweaks, I could make it look pretty dang close. The other items I ended up getting for this jacket were neon ribbon for the trim, interfacing for the collar, some black pleather fabric, 2mm EVA foam, and iron-on vinyl, which was a whole thing, but we'll get into that later. The first two things I definitely did in the wrong order, so just keep that in mind and reverse these steps.
Strike that. Reverse it.
Do as I say, not as I do. To start this jacket off, I took my interfacing and cut it to the size and shape of the collar. I made a tiny incision on the edge of the collar and slid my interfacing through. Once it was completely in, I sealed off the slit with hot glue. Here's how the collar looked with the interfacing now in place. Looking good. Next, I started working on those neon lines Rebecca has all around the edges of her jacket and on her collar. To achieve a similar look, I used the neon ribbon we picked up earlier and started cutting and pinning into place. I did the same thing for all the neon trim around the cuffs and the hem of the jacket until I had this. All that was left to do was hand sew it down. Simple, right? Well, and this is where things got a little bit dicey. I hand sewed all the ribbon in place with a needle and thread, but the interfacing was so tight and stiff that the hand sewing process on the collar was very difficult and hard to get through. So I would recommend doing your hand sewing on the collar before you put the interfacing in instead of after, and maybe saving the last little strip on the side to put over the hot glued spot, of course. But do the rest beforehand, because I got through it, but it was miserable. 10 out of 10 do not recommend. But that was basically the first half of the jacket done. Okay, now it's time to move on to the black paneling details, I guess. I don't know what else to call them, really. They feel like panels to me, so that's what we're going with. Anyways, I'll spare you the story of how I did this wrong the first time, wasted a bunch of fabric and time, and instead I'll just show you how you should do it, probably. First thing I needed for the panels was a pattern, so I used masking tape and started covering the jacket. Once I had all the spots covered, I traced the shapes I wanted and peeled off the tape and cut them into the pattern pieces. Once I was done, I had a front piece, a large front shoulder piece, a small arm piece, and a back piece. Now that we have our pattern pieces, it's time to trace them all onto 2mm EVA foam for both sides. So let's just speed through that part. I did the same process again for my pleather fabric, only this time making sure the shapes were slightly larger than the EVA foam shapes. As you can see, this pleather fabric is very thin, while the panels on Rebecca's jacket look pretty thick. So taking the pleather, covering the EVA foam, and sewing through it gave our panels the illusion of being made out of a thicker fabric. Yeah, and I guess you can sew through 2mm EVA foam, so who knew? Now that all our pieces are covered, it's time to assemble. I started with the front and back pieces because those were able to go through the sewing machine. The sleeve pieces, on the other hand, were not going to be going on so easily. Bye. They went on even easier with E6000 glue and hot glue. The best part is the stitching on these pieces makes it look like they are sewn on. So let's just keep this part on the DL, okay? Oh, I also covered the back of this part that sticks off from the jacket in pleather. And I covered up any edges where the EVA foam was popping out with a Sharpie. It was at this point I realized I had forgotten those pesky things on the right sleeve. Like, what do I even call these? Anyways, I made them just like the other pieces with a tape pattern, which I traced onto EVA foam 3 times because of course there's 3 of them, and did a very questionable pleather cover job. But that's okay, cause that's what Sharpies are for, right? Of course glued these on because the hand stitching ship had sailed a long time ago. finally, all I had left to do was those 2 little rings that are on the front of the jacket, like the little neon ones, which is where our iron-on vinyl comes into play. And boy, is that a story. Long story short, I bought the iron-on vinyl with the intention to iron it on. Shocker, I know. What I didn't think about at the time was irons destroy EVA foam, completely distort the shape and just like burn it to a crisp. So I couldn't iron these on the jacket. What I did instead was hot glue them to the front of the jacket. So don't be like me, iron on your little rings before the pleather is attached to the EVA foam, or else you'll end up hot gluing iron-on vinyl decals onto the front of your jacket. Yeah, but with that, the entire jacket was complete, so I guess that's good, right? Shoes were fairly simple, so let's dive in. I did the same thing with the shoes that I did with the jacket and thrifted a base piece that I thought was pretty similar to Becca's shoes. Little bit of Adidas Ultra Boost action. So I think these are a good base. I'll be able to kind of add the tongue thing and all the details I need to. But I think these are a good base. They were $20, but I had a $5 off, so they were only $15. So I think I'm doing pretty good. First thing I did was draft a pattern for the tongue with more masking tape and a Sharpie. Cut that out and once again, traced it onto EVA foam. I made them curve slightly with a heat gun, shaping them as they cool. After that, I blasted them with Plasti-Dip primer and hand painted them black. To recreate the 2 neon strips Becca's shoes have, I once again whipped out the ribbon, cut it to size, and pinned it in place. And like we learned earlier, you can sew through 2mm EVA. Ta-da! Our tongue is done, and it also has a very convenient slide feature. The toe required a little more ribbon and some very questionable hand stitching, but hey, it worked out. Here's the shoes all put together. So, let's talk headbands. And no, not the one Yoshi's wearing. So, I did the headband the night before I needed it done for Nightmare on Chicago Street. So you could call this night the nightmare before nightmare, if you will, and I will, because it was a nightmare. It was a whole mess, so let me explain.
Explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
So you know how I made patterns for everything else up until this point? You know, the little tape patterns that I drew out and got everything right before I started cutting stuff? Yeah, didn't do that for this. Thankfully, we were working with cardboard here, so like the financial losses were not that great. So for the headband, I went in guns blazing, much like Rebecca. I wish I got and just started drawing the general shape I wanted onto cardboard and cutting it out until I had the 3 shapes I needed for this little, like, I don't know what you call it, little like wing things, I guess, for the headband. So several attempts were made and lots of cardboard was cut, but I did eventually end up with this little like V-shaped wing piece and with these 2 smaller diamond-ish shapes. So that's what we're working with. Once I had all the shapes I wanted cut out and mirrored them for the other side, I used foam clay to make like the little slopey ridge part on the headpiece and just used the clay to smooth out the cardboard look to get rid of those like ridges, because obviously we don't want this to look like cardboard. I filled in the sides as well with the foam clay, so just getting rid of the cardboard look. Foam clay is pretty good for that. Once the foam clay was dry, I took some sandpaper and smoothed them out with the sandpaper. Then it was time to prime for paint. I knew if I painted these black completely, those neon stripes she has on her headpiece would be very hard to paint on, especially in the very short amount of time I had to finish this headband. So I used painter's tape and cut tiny little strips off and placed them down on the headband where the neon strips would go. Then I primed with black Plasti-Dip and painted with a black spray paint. So when they were done drying, I was able to take the painter's tape off and paint on my neon strips with pretty much no issues. So that was nice, especially in like the panicked mode I was in working on this headband like 5 minutes before I had to leave. Finally, the last thing I did was glue these to a headband from Dollar Tree. And I just used hot glue and worked pretty well, so I have no complaint. I still haven't painted the backside black because I was in too much of a rush. I've not gone back and revisited that yet.
Oh, David, my man, what's going on?
So, the guns. Here is the kind of gun I got. The Lewant, I guess? Range of 26 to 32 feet water gun. Like, who even knew they made stuff like that? So here's what happened with the guns. I was scouring the web in search of some like toy guns, Nerf guns, something that would work that I could paint to look like Becca's guns. Initially, I thought I was gonna make these guns from like cardboard or something, but your girl was out of time. So once I realized Nerf didn't have something, or maybe I don't know, just didn't look hard enough, but I could not find a Nerf gun that worked for what I wanted. None of these Nerf guns were really passing the vibe check, if you know what I mean. So after a pretty discouraging Nerf gun search, I offhandedly typed water gun into eBay, and lo and behold, here were these two weirdly realistic looking water guns for sale. They even had removable clips that you fill with water and have a freaking range of, what was it? 26 to 32 feet. Like, what are these? Yeah, hi. I just wanted to interrupt here really quick and say I Googled this water gun brand, and not only are they on Amazon, but they have a ton of different models. Like, look at this one. Oh my gosh. I might have to buy more of these. These guns were like pretty much perfect, except the color. So I got some spray paint from Michael's, pink and teal, taped off the guns, painted the handles black, and then just did the inverse pattern of pink and teal on the different guns. The best part was removing the tape after you were done painting, like so satisfying most of the time, except for when the paint kind of seeped through. You know, it happens. And that's the story of my weirdly perfect water guns. Thanks, eBay. Well, friends, we made it to the end. Congratulations. Don't worry, I didn't forget about the wig, which I did DIY, by the way, but that's gonna be in a separate video coming out when's that video coming out? Thank you. Ah, yes, the 27th. So stay tuned, subscribe for that. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you next time. Peace. I'm out of here.